These kids and their brother were abandoned on the highway and beaten until they passed out by their own father. But the cruel man didn't know that a millionaire saw everything, and what happens next will shock everyone. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching sun of rural Oklahoma beat down on the dusty road winding between the ranches near Tulsa. Beverly Carter, 42, was hurrying towards the clinic where she worked as a nurse when her eyes caught a scene that froze her blood. In the distance, at the entrance of a small, dilapidated farm, a burly man was violently shaking two small children. Her heart leaped into her throat as she recognized her brother, Randy, 38. Completely deranged, shouting incomprehensible words while the little twins, Aiden and Adeline, both just 6 years old, tried in vain to protect themselves from their father's blows. Tears streamed down the nurse's face as she ran towards the scene, her legs trembling with each step. "Randy, for God's sake, stop it!" she screamed, her voice choked with despair. But her brother seemed possessed by an uncontrollable rage. His eyes glazed over and his breath ragged, betraying his altered state. It was at that moment that a black Cadillac Escalade screeched to a halt on the road, kicking up a cloud of red dust. A tall man with silver hair and an imposing stature stepped out of the vehicle. Walter Sterling, 58, owner of the largest dairy network in the region, was returning from a routine visit to one of his properties when he came across the devastating scene. "Release those children immediately!" Walter's deep, authoritative voice cut through the air like thunder. Randy, caught off guard, loosened his grip on the little ones, who took the opportunity to break free and run behind Beverly. The businessman approached with firm steps, his normally serene face now contorted into an expression of deep outrage. Something in that scene had stirred up old and painful memories within him, memories he had struggled for decades to forget. "Who do you think you are, getting involved in my family?" Randy staggered towards Walter, who remained unwavering. "I'm someone who won't allow you to hurt these children," the businessman replied, his voice laden with an authority that made Randy recoil instinctively. Beverly hugged her niece and nephew, who were trembling and sobbing softly. Her experienced nurse's eyes immediately noticed the various bruises on the children's slender arms, some recent, others already healing. Their small bodies also showed clear signs of malnutrition. "They need urgent medical attention," Beverly declared, her professional voice masking the whirlwind of emotions consuming her inside. "The nearest hospital is 20 minutes from here." Walter didn't hesitate. "My car is at your disposal. Let's take them right away." As he helped the children into the vehicle, Beverly cast one last look at her brother, who now seemed smaller and more fragile, sitting in the dust of the road with his head in his hands. She knew that pattern well, the moments of rage followed by periods of apparent remorse, but this time something was different. Randy's behavior seemed more erratic, more frightening. At the hospital, while the twins were being examined, Walter remained in the waiting room, his mind plunged into dark thoughts. The images of that morning mingled with flashbacks of his own traumatic childhood, moments he had tried so hard to bury in the past. Dr. Gerald Evans, 62, the only pediatrician in town, delivered a worrying diagnosis. In addition to the various bruises, the children showed severe malnutrition and signs of prolonged neglect. "They need intensive care and a safe environment to recover," the doctor explained, his experienced face revealing genuine concern. It was at that moment that Walter made a decision that would forever change the course of several lives. "Nurse Carter," he addressed the nurse, who hadn't left her niece and nephew's side, "I have a proposition for you." In the next few minutes, he explained his plan. He would offer Beverly a job at his mansion and temporary shelter for the twins during their recovery. The nurse was stunned by the unexpected generosity, but something in the businessman's determined gaze suggested there was more to the offer than simple altruism. What none of those present knew was that at that very moment, Mildred Sterling, 55, Walter's wife, was receiving a visit at her mansion from Jimmy the Hammer Harrison, 60, a businessman with a dubious reputation in the area. The subject of the conversation, a huge debt incurred by Randy at his poker games. While Walter arranged for the children to be transferred to a private room in the hospital, Beverly received a disturbing call. It was Randy, his voice choked and confused. "Bev, I don't know what's happening to me. I've been having terrible headaches, and there's this guy, Jimmy. He said he's going to use the kids to force me to pay. You need to protect them, Bev. You need to..." The call dropped before Beverly could respond. Her heart clenched at the thought of her brother, but her protective instinct took over. Looking at her niece and nephew asleep in the hospital beds, she made her own decision. She would accept Walter's offer, even without knowing that this choice would trigger a series of events that no one could foresee. The next day, the Sterling Mansion, an imposing structure on the outskirts of Tulsa, was plunged into a tense silence. Mildred, dressed impeccably as always, awaited her husband's arrival in the main living room. Her fingers drummed nervously on the arm of the leather armchair as she mentally rehearsed the words she would use to confront him. When Walter finally arrived, accompanied by Beverly and the twins, Mildred's face transformed into an icy mask. "So it's true," she said, her voice controlled but cutting. "You really intend to bring these children into our home?" Aidan and Adeline, still subdued but already showing signs of improvement after medical care, instinctively moved closer to Beverly. The nurse could feel the trembling in the little bodies pressed against her legs. "Mildred, dear," Walter began, using the conciliatory tone he always employed in arguments with his wife, "it's a temporary situation. The children need a safe environment to recover." "Temporary?" Mildred laughed humorlessly. "Like the renovation of the East Wing was temporary. Like the construction of the new garage was temporary." She stood up, her heels echoing on the marble floor as she approached the group. "You always do this, Walter. You make decisions that affect our lives without consulting me." The businessman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his wife's words. In their 23 years of marriage, he had learned to recognize when Mildred was truly hurt beyond her usual coldness. "Mrs. Sterling," Beverly interjected respectfully, "I promise that my presence and the children's won't..." "Your presence," Mildred interrupted, her eyes flashing. "So you're going to live here too? You better tell me right away if anyone else is moving into my house." It was at that moment that Clara, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for decades, rushed into the room. "Mrs. Sterling, there's a man at the gate. He says he needs to talk to Mr. Sterling urgently about Randy." The name made the twins shrink even further. Walter exchanged a worried look with Beverly before turning to the housekeeper. "Who is he, Clara?" "He says his name is Jimmy the Hammer Harrison, Mr. Sterling." Mildred's face paled visibly at the sound of the name. She turned to her husband, her voice now almost a whisper. "Do you have any idea what you're bringing into our home?" Before Walter could respond, Beverly stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling, I need to tell you something about Jimmy and my brother. Something I recently found out that might explain a lot." In the next few minutes, while Clara took the children to see the kitchen, Beverly revealed the complex web involving her brother. Randy, always prone to gambling, had become increasingly involved with Jimmy the Hammer Harrison, a lone shark known for his unorthodox collection methods. The debts had grown exponentially, and along with them, Randy's behavior had become increasingly erratic and violent. "But something's wrong," Beverly continued, her hands twisting nervously. "My brother has always had his problems, but in recent months, it's like he's another person. The constant headaches, the memory lapses, the outbursts of rage." "Why didn't you seek help before?" Mildred asked, her tone still harsh but with an almost imperceptible note of compassion. I've been away from the family for a long time, Beverly admitted, her eyes filling with tears. Our mother passed away 2 months ago. When I returned for the funeral, I discovered the situation with the kids. I tried to intervene, but Randy was unrecognizable. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the distant sound of children's laughter coming from the kitchen, where Clara was probably offering them some homemade candy. I'm going to talk to Jimmy, Walter decided, adjusting his jacket. But first, we need to establish some clear rules about this situation. He was interrupted by the shrill sound of the telephone. Clara appeared again, her normally serene face now marked by worry. Beverly, it's from the hospital. Your brother was admitted to the emergency room. It seems he was found unconscious in a ditch near the highway. What followed was a rush. While Beverly prepared to go to the hospital, Mildred surprised everyone by declaring, "The children stay, at least until we understand what's going on." Her face betrayed no emotion, but something in her eyes had changed. At the hospital, Dr. Evans awaited with disturbing news. Preliminary tests had revealed something beyond the apparent injuries caused by the alleged fall. There is a considerable mass pressing on the frontal lobe of the brain, he explained, showing the images. That would explain the changes in behavior, the headaches, the outbursts of rage. Beverly staggered, being supported by Walter. The pieces began to fit together in a painfully clear way. Her brother wasn't just a violent man, he was sick. Back at the mansion, late at night, they found Mildred sitting on the porch, watching the twins who, after a bath and a decent meal, were playing in the garden under Clara's watchful eye. Mrs. Sterling seemed lost in thought. 15 years, she said suddenly, without taking her eyes off the children. It's been 15 years since I lost my babies. Walter sat down next to his wife, taking her hand in his. It was the first time in more than a decade that Mildred had mentioned the lost pregnancy that had changed their lives forever. They were twins too, she continued, her voice almost a whisper. A boy and a girl. After that, I could never... Her voice failed, and for the first time in years, Mildred allowed tears to run freely down her face. The moment was interrupted by a car that parked abruptly in front of the mansion. It was Jimmy the Hammer Harrison, accompanied by 2 men with a threatening appearance. "I've come to collect what's mine," he shouted from the gate, "and I'm not leaving without an agreement." Walter stood up, his posture once again assuming that natural authority that characterized him. But before he could take a step, Mildred stopped him by the arm. "There's something you need to know about Jimmy," she said, her face now a mask of determination. "Something I found out today that changes everything." Mildred's revelation echoed like thunder in the Oklahoma night. With her eyes fixed on the gate where Jimmy awaited, she told Walter how, that very morning, she had received a visit from Doris, a former employee of the loan shark who kept dark secrets about his business. "He's not just after the money," Mildred explained, her voice trembling slightly. "Jimmy found out about your decision to help the children and saw an opportunity. He wants to use this situation to get closer to your business, Walter, to gain access to your contacts, to your properties." Inside the house, Beverly watched the scene through the library window, her heart pounding as she kept her niece and nephew protected behind her. Aidan, always more sensitive, clung tightly to her skirt, while Adeline, though frightened, kept her eyes fixed on the movement outside. "Auntie," whispered the girl, "why are you crying?" Only then did Beverly realize the tears that were silently streaming down her face. How could she explain the complexity of the situation to a 6-year-old? How to justify that her own father, now struggling against a disease that transformed his personality, had become involved with dangerous people who now threatened everyone? In the garden, Walter walked towards the gate with the erect posture that characterized him. Years of managing a dairy empire had taught him to remain calm, even in the most tense situations. At his side, Mildred followed with equally firm steps, surprising everyone with her imposing presence. "Jimmy," Walter's voice sounded clear in the night, "I believe we can resolve this civilly." The loan shark gave a crooked smile, his yellow teeth gleaming under the lamplight. "Civilly? Like your friend Larry settled things civilly with you?" The mention of his partner's name made Walter hesitate for a moment. How did Jimmy know about Larry? "Oh, didn't you know?" Jimmy continued, savoring each word. "Your partner of decades has been doing some interesting business lately. Business you might want to know about before they become public." It was at that moment that a familiar car parked near the gate. Gerald Prescott, the most respected lawyer in the region, stepped out of the vehicle, carrying a leather briefcase under his arm. His arrival was no coincidence. Mildred had called him as soon as Doris left the mansion that morning. "Gentlemen," the lawyer's deep voice cut through the tension in the air, "I suggest we continue this conversation in a more appropriate environment. I have some documents here that may be of interest to everyone." In the next few minutes, the group gathered in the mansion's living room. Beverly had taken the children to the room prepared for them, where Clara was distracting them with old stories of Oklahoma. "My client," Gerald began, indicating Mildred with a respectful gesture, "received disturbing information today about certain financial activities involving Mr. Sterling's company. Activities that appear to involve the direct participation of Mr. Larry and, curiously, connect with Mr. Harrison's business." Jimmy the Hammer shifted uneasily in his armchair as the lawyer opened his briefcase, revealing a series of carefully organized documents. "It's interesting to note," Gerald continued, "how certain signatures of Mr. Sterling appear on contracts he has never seen. Even more interesting is discovering that Mr. Campos has been holding frequent meetings with people known for their connections with less than legitimate activities." Jimmy the Hammer's face began to lose color. Beside him, his henchman looked increasingly uncomfortable. "But the most fascinating thing," Mildred took the floor, her voice laden with calculated coldness, "is discovering that Randy's debts were artificially inflated, that every payment he made mysteriously generated even higher interest. Isn't that right, Jimmy?" The silence that followed was deafening. Upstairs, the distant laughter of the children could be heard, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the room. "What do you want?" Jimmy the Hammer finally asked, his previous arrogance completely dissipated. "First," Walter spoke up, "you're going to cancel all of Randy's debts. Second, you're going to stay away completely from any matter related to my company or my family, and that includes these children. And if I refuse, then," Gerald smiled serenely, "these documents will find their way to certain authorities, who would be very interested in learning about your business methods." After Jimmy the Hammer and his men left, visibly disgruntled but without a choice, a new silence took over the mansion. Walter poured himself a shot of bourbon, his mind processing the evening's revelations. "How did you know?" he asked his wife. "How did you know we should call Gerald?" Mildred approached the window, watching the city lights in the distance. "Doris wasn't the first person to come to me with stories about Jimmy the Hammer. I've been gathering information for months, putting the pieces together. When you brought the children, I realized I needed to act." "Why?" Walter asked softly, noticing something different in his wife's eyes. "Because," she replied after a long moment, "when I saw those children earlier today, playing in the garden, it was like seeing our children, Walter, the children we lost. And for the first time in 15 years, that memory didn't hurt, it brought hope." The moment was interrupted by Beverly, who came down the stairs hurriedly. "Call from the hospital," she announced, her face a mixture of worry and relief. Randy woke up, and there's someone else who wants to see him, a woman who claims to be... Before she could complete the sentence, a familiar voice echoed from the entrance hall, causing everyone to turn around in surprise. "My name is April," said the elegantly dressed woman who had just entered, "and I've come to get my children." The air in the room suddenly became heavy with April's arrival. At 32, she exuded an elegance that contrasted sharply with the simplicity of Tulsa. Her impeccable designer suit and the discreet but expensive jewelry suggested a life very different from the one she led 6 years ago when she abandoned the newborn twins. Beverly was the first to react, her body instinctively moving towards the stairs, as if to create a physical barrier between April and the children sleeping upstairs. "How did you know where to find them?" asked the nurse, her voice trembling slightly. "Tulsa isn't that big," April replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "News travels fast, especially when it involves the illustrious Walter Sterling." Mildred, who was watching the scene with an unreadable expression, stepped forward. "It's almost 10 o'clock at night. The children are sleeping after an extremely difficult day. Any discussion about your claim can wait until tomorrow." "Claim?" April laughed without humor. "I'm talking about my children, my biological children who were improperly registered by Randy." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Walter, who had until then maintained his calm demeanor, felt his blood run cold. If it were true, the whole situation became even more complex. "That's a lie!" Beverly exclaimed, but something in her expression betrayed a shadow of doubt. "Is it?" April pulled a folder with documents from her purse. "I have here copies of the original birth certificates, DNA tests, and..." "Enough!" Mildred's voice cut through the air like a razor. "As my husband said, it's 10 o'clock at night. If you really care about the well-being of these children, you'll come back tomorrow at a suitable time. With your lawyers, if you wish. We'll have ours too." Something in Mildred's natural authority made April step back. "I'll be back at 9 in the morning," she announced, heading towards the door. "And I suggest you prepare the children. They'll be returning with me to Dallas." After her departure, a heavy silence dominated the atmosphere. It was Clara, who had observed everything discreetly from the kitchen door, who finally spoke. The little ones woke up with the voices. They're scared. In the children's room, they found Aiden huddled under the covers, while Adeline was sitting on the bed, her big eyes fixed on the door. "It was her, wasn't it?" asked the girl, her voice small but firm. "The woman who left us at the hospital?" Beverly sat on the edge of the bed, fighting back tears. You remember her?" "Only in dreams," Aiden replied, emerging slowly from his hiding place. "Sometimes I dream of a woman crying, leaving us in a place with lots of lights." Mildred, who was watching the scene from the door, felt something break inside her. Memories of her own loss mingled with a new emotion, a protective instinct that she thought she had lost 15 years ago. "No one is going to take you," she declared, surprising everyone with the intensity of her voice. "Not without a fight." The next morning, the Sterling mansion was transformed into a legal battlefield. Gerald Prescott arrived early, accompanied by a team of assistants carrying stacks of documents and legal codes. At 9 o'clock sharp, April returned, this time accompanied by a lawyer from Dallas whose designer briefcase and Italian suit screamed metropolitan in every detail. The meeting took place in Walter's office. Outside, Clara tried to distract the twins with a special breakfast, but the children barely touched the food, their eyes constantly turning to the closed door of the office. "Gentlemen," began April's lawyer, "the facts are simple. My client is the biological mother of the children. The registration made by Randy Carter is irregular and—" "The facts are not that simple," Gerald interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "We have here," he said, removing a document from his file, "the testimony of 3 nurses from the hospital where the children were born. All confirm that Ms. April voluntarily signed a waiver of parental rights. A document that was obtained when my client was in a state of emotional vulnerability," the Dallas lawyer protested. "And in the last 6 years?" Mildred questioned, her voice laden with contained anger. "Where was your client while the children were in need, while they were suffering abuse?" "I was building a better life," April exploded, momentarily abandoning her controlled demeanor. "You don't know what it's like to have 2 babies with no money, no support." "No," Mildred replied coldly, "but I know what it's like to lose 2 babies and spend 15 years dreaming of the sound of children's laughter in the hallways of my house." The silence that followed was interrupted by urgent knocks on the door. It was Beverly, her face pale. "It's from the hospital. Randy's having a crisis. The doctors say we need to go immediately." At the hospital, they found Randy sedated after a violent episode caused by the pressure of the tumor. Dr. Evans awaited with even more worrying news. The tumor was growing faster than expected. "We need to operate as soon as possible," explained the doctor, "but it's a delicate surgery with considerable risks." "And how much does it cost?" Beverly asked, her voice choked. "Don't worry about that," Walter replied immediately. "We'll provide the best possible treatment." It was at that moment that Randy began to awaken from sedation. His eyes, before always clouded by anger or confusion, now showed a painful lucidity. "I need to tell you," he murmured, his voice hoarse, "about the kids, about April." Everyone approached the bed, tense. Randy closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. "They're not my children," he said finally. "But they're not just hers either." Before he could continue, a new figure appeared at the door of the room. It was Oscar, 40, Randy's cousin who everyone thought was working on an oil rig in North Dakota. "I think it's time to tell the whole truth," he said, his face marked by an expression of guilt and determination. The hospital room plunged into a dense silence as Oscar approached Randy's bed. The smell of antiseptic seemed stronger now, mixing with the palpable tension in the air. Beverly, who knew the 2 cousins well, immediately realized that there was something different in the look they exchanged. "Aiden is my son," Oscar revealed, his voice trembling slightly. "But Adeline is Randy's daughter. They are dizygotic twins." The revelation struck everyone like lightning. Mildred, who had until then maintained her haughty posture, needed to lean against the wall. Walter, always so controlled, let out an exclamation of surprise. "How is that possible?" Gerald Prescott asked, his lawyer's instinct already calculating the legal implications of the situation. April, who had arrived at the hospital shortly after the others, took a step forward. Her mask of sophistication began to crack, revealing the weight of 6 years of secrets. "I worked as a secretary in 2 different companies at the time," she began to explain, her voice laden with contained emotions. "Randy was a client of one, Oscar of the other. They didn't know about each other. I got involved with both of them in the same period." "And when did you discover the pregnancy?" Beverly asked, her voice softer than one would expect given the shock of the revelation. "It was a nightmare," April continued, tears finally breaking her facade of control. "I found out I was pregnant with twins and, according to the doctors' calculations, there was a possibility that they had different fathers. I did the DNA test during the pregnancy, but I didn't have the courage to tell either of them." Randy, still weak on the hospital bed, let out a heavy sigh. "When she abandoned the babies, Beverly found them and came to me. I knew there was a chance they weren't mine, but you registered them anyway," Mildred completed, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. "He was trying to protect them," Oscar intervened, running a hand through his prematurely graying hair. I only found out the truth 3 years later when I returned to Tulsa to visit my mother. One look at Aiden was enough. He's identical to me as a child." Dr. Evans, who had returned silently to the room, cleared his throat to draw everyone's attention. "Sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss Randy's surgery. Time is crucial." It was then that Larry, Walter's partner, burst into the room, his face red with agitation. "Walter, we need to talk. Now! It's about the company." "Whatever it is, it can wait," Walter replied dryly, still processing the revelations about the children. "No, it can't," Larry insisted, beads of sweat dripping down his forehead. "The investors are abandoning ship. Someone leaked information about alleged irregularities and irregularities that you created," Mildred exploded, surprising everyone with her vehemence. "Did you think we wouldn't discover your forgeries, the embezzlements?" Larry paled visibly. How did you—" "People talk, Larry," she continued, years of social coldness now serving as a sharp weapon, especially when they discover they're being used in fraudulent schemes. Walter watched the scene with a mixture of sadness and resignation. 20 years of partnership and friendship crumbling before his eyes. "How much?" he asked simply. 30 million, Larry replied, his voice almost a whisper. "But I can explain." "No," Walter interrupted him. "You can't. And now, because of you, I may not be able to pay for the treatment that could save Randy's life." It was at that moment that Clara rushed into the room, her hands trembling as she held the cell phone. "Mrs. Sterling, the children, they're gone." Panic set in immediately. April let out a muffled cry while Beverly was already running into the hallway. "What do you mean, gone?" Mildred demanded, her face as pale as wax. "They were in the mansion's garden with Dolores, the new maid," Clara explained between sobs. "She said she turned her back for a minute and—" "The new maid?" Walter questioned. "What new maid?" A heavy silence fell over the room as the realization hit everyone. Jimmy, the hammer. It had to be his doing. "My contacts," Oscar spoke up, already dialing on his cell phone. "I work in security on the rigs. I have friends who can help search." "That won't be necessary," a calm voice sounded from the door. It was Adeline, holding Aiden's hand. Behind them, a gentle-looking elderly lady observed the scene. "Mrs. Esther," Beverly exclaimed, recognizing the midwife who had helped with the birth of the twins. "The children came to me," the lady explained, entering the room leaning on her cane. "They said they needed to know the truth about their birth before everything changed again." Adeline, always the more decisive of the two, stepped forward. "Mrs. Esther told us everything, about our mother, about our fathers, and about the promise that Aunt Beverly made on the day we were born." All eyes turned to Beverly, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. "What promise?" April asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The day you left them at the hospital," Beverly began, silent tears streaming down her face. "I promised them that I would never allow them to be separated. No matter what happened, they would grow up together. And that's why we came here." Aiden spoke for the first time, his voice small but determined. "We don't want to go to Dallas. We don't want to be separated. And we don't want anyone fighting over us," Adeline added. "We've seen too many fights already." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Randy's heart monitor, which began to show worrying changes. Dr. Evans immediately approached, checking the vital signs. "We need to resolve this later," he declared urgently. "His condition is worsening. We need to do the surgery now." "But the costs—" Larry began. "I have a solution," Mildred announced suddenly, removing something from her purse. It was an old blue velvet box. "My family jewels. They're worth more than enough to cover the surgery and recover some of the company's losses." "Mildred," Walter protested, "those jewels have been in your family for generations." "And what better use could they have?" she replied with a soft smile. than to help keep a family together. At that moment, looking at the children who had changed their lives in such a short time, no one dared to argue. But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, a sound of rushing in the hallway announced new problems. It was Clara again, this time accompanied by a police officer. "Miss April," he said gravely, "we need you at the police station. We have some questions about your involvement in a fraud scheme in Dallas." The following weeks in Tulsa were like the rainy season before spring, turbulent but necessary for new flowers to bloom. Randy's surgery, performed successfully thanks to Mildred's jewels, marked the beginning of a series of transformations in the lives of everyone involved. At the hospital, during the long recovery, Randy underwent a change that went beyond the physical. With the tumor removed and under psychological counseling, his original personality began to emerge. A quiet man with a shy smile who carried the weight of his past actions with sincere regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said one afternoon while the twins visited him under Beverly's supervision. "But I want you to know that even though I'm not your biological father, the love I feel is real." Aidan and Adeline, demonstrating a maturity beyond their 6 years, responded to the comment with a spontaneous hug that made the eyes of everyone present fill with tears. At the Sterling mansion, the changes were equally profound. Mildred, who for years had kept the rooms in the East Wing locked, though she had decorated for the babies she lost, finally found the strength to open them. With the help of Clara and the children, she transformed the space into 2 cheerful bedrooms, where new toys shared space with small treasures she had kept for 15 years. "Everything has its time," she explained to Walter, while they watched the twins playing in the garden. "I needed to lose my family jewels to understand that the real treasure is here, before our eyes." The investigation into April's activities in Dallas revealed a complex scheme of corporate fraud. She had built her new life on a foundation of lies and forged documents, using privileged information from the companies where she worked to enrich herself illicitly. "I thought money would be enough," she confessed during a supervised visit before being transferred to answer for her crimes. "That if I came back rich and powerful, I could buy the right to be a mother again. But looking at them now, I see that they already have everything they need." The revelation about Aidan's paternity brought Oscar definitively back to Tulsa. He requested a transfer from the oil rig and began working as a security consultant for Walter's companies, dedicating his free hours to building a relationship with the son he didn't know he had. "I don't want to take anyone's place," he assured during a frank conversation with everyone involved. "I just want the chance to be part of his life, of both of theirs, actually. After all, they're inseparable." The financial recovery of the dairy company came from an unexpected source. When the story of the sale of the family jewels spread throughout the city, several small rural producers who had been doing business with Walter for years came together to help. They offered investments, renegotiated deadlines, and some even sold land to inject capital into the business. "You've always been fair with us," explained Mr. Johnson, a milk producer who had known Walter for decades. "Now it's our turn to return the favor." Larry, after confessing all his schemes and returning part of the embezzled money, left the city under the weight of shame. But his departure opened space for a necessary restructuring in the company, with Mildred taking an active role in management and bringing a new perspective to the business. Jimmy the Hammer Harrison, after the exposure of his illicit activities, tried to flee the city, but was apprehended on the highway. His connections with loan sharking and fraud schemes finally came to light, freeing many families from the yoke of his abusive debts. On a particularly significant afternoon, during the traditional 4th of July celebration, the first that the twins celebrated safely and surrounded by love, Beverly finally shared with everyone the complete story of the children's birth. "That night," she said, as everyone gathered around the bonfire, "I was on duty at the maternity ward. April arrived alone in labor. When the babies were born and she saw that they were different, Aiden with honey-colored eyes like Oscar, Adeline with the unmistakable Carter chin, she panicked." She paused, her eyes lost in the flames that danced in the night. She signed the waiver of parental rights and disappeared before dawn. I knew that my brother, even with all his problems, had a good heart. So I went to him, told him a story about the babies being abandoned, and suggested that he register them. I never imagined that that decision would trigger so much pain and so much healing. 6 months after the surgery, in a simple ceremony at the City Hall, all the adults involved in the twins' lives signed a shared custody agreement. Walter and Mildred would be the primary guardians, with Randy, Oscar, and Beverly maintaining visitation rights and active participation in the children's upbringing. "Family isn't just a matter of blood," declared Judge Thompson, moved to formalize the agreement. "It's choice, it's care, it's love." The morning after the ceremony, as the sun rose over Tulsa, Mildred found the twins sitting on the mansion's porch, sharing a donut made by Clara. "Grandma Mildred," called Adeline. The word grandma had begun to be used spontaneously by the children a few weeks earlier. "Do you think it's going to be like this forever now?" Mildred sat between them, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against hers. "Forever is a long time, my love, but I can promise you that, as long as it depends on us, you will never be alone again." Aiden, always more quiet and observant, took Mildred's hand. "We're never going to have to choose between the people we love again, right?" "Never," she assured, her voice firm, "because true love doesn't divide, it multiplies." At that moment, watching the sun rise on the horizon and painting the Oklahoma sky with shades of pink and gold, Mildred finally understood. Sometimes you have to lose something precious to find something even more valuable. Her family jewels had bought more than Randy's surgery. They had bought the chance to create new memories, to heal old wounds, to build a family that went beyond blood ties. And there, in the tight embrace of 2 children that destiny had placed, in her path, she found a treasure that no jewel could buy. The unconditional love that transforms strangers into family, that transforms pain into hope, that transforms an empty house into a home full of laughter and dreams for the future.